You know, juries do different things depending on the makeup of the jury, depending on the foreman. There was a lot of evidence in this case. There was a lot of video evidence. Some of their questions, they wanted an additional laptop. They wanted to look at some more of the video evidence. So I want to commend this jury. I think they took a lot of time to review this evidence. This is an important verdict. They gave the defendant in this case what he has a right to, which is an examination of that evidence. But at the end of the day, the jury did the right thing and came back with first degree with use of a deadly weapon, first degree murder with use of a deadly weapon, and both enhancements. This crime was committed with the use of a deadly weapon, and this crime was committed against an elderly person.
The jury kind of was thrown a curveball in closing with the defense there, basically pointing out the silhouette of a different looking person than Robert Tellis in the suspect's alleged vehicle there. How do you think that played into the big delay, or at least the length of time it took the jury to decide this? Because they had to go in the jury room and figure this out themselves.
Well, defense lawyers sometimes have to throw curveballs. That's their job. But I'll tell you, the jury hit the ball out of the park this time. They hit a home run by getting the right verdict.
Were you surprised by the length of the jury deliberations?
Yes, a little. To be candid, I think most everybody that followed this trial and watched this trial and was familiar with the evidence thought the verdict would come a little quicker. But again, there were over 400 exhibits. Many of these exhibits were video evidence. And I think the jury took their time and examined all of the evidence. That's what we want juries to do. We want them to look at all of the evidence. We want them to consider what the defense offers. But I'll say it again, at the end of the day, after looking at all the evidence, their verdict was clear and convincing.
Could you address him taking the stand in his defense?
Well, a defendant has a right to testify or choose not to testify. In this case, Mr. Tellis chose to testify. He gave narrative testimony. I think that the jury listened carefully. I was in the courtroom for a number of hours during this trial, and I was watching the jury. I was watching how the jury reacted to the evidence. And I think they gave Mr. Tellis the benefit of the doubt. They listened to him. But again, the jury verdict speaks for itself.
Do you think his decision to testify helped or hurt him?
You know, maybe that's what we'll ask the jury one day when this is all over.
Mr. Wolfson, what is the significance of testifying by narrative? Have you ever had a case where you've had a client, when you were a defense lawyer, testify by narrative?
It's certainly unusual. It is certainly rare. But sometimes, based upon the ethical rules that apply, a decision is made for a defendant to give a narrative.
What ethical rules might apply in a case like this?
I'm not going to speak to that at this point. You know, the case isn't over. We're going to a penalty hearing in about an hour. Certain witnesses will testify, and the jury still has another decision to render, and that's the decision of penalty.
What do you think is the appropriate penalty?
Well, they've got three options. They can come back with life without the possibility of parole, life with the possibility of parole after serving a minimum of 20 years, or a sentence of 50 years with minimum parole eligibility after 20 years. So the jury has options. I'm not going to invade the province of the jury at this time. I've got two excellent prosecutors that are going to present some information for the jury to consider. I'll respect whatever verdict, whatever sentence the jury comes back with.
Generally, in a case where you go to a penalty phase, what is it that a prosecutor is asking a jury to consider?
Well, during the guilt phase, they're asked to consider the evidence of guilt. You know, what evidence does the prosecution have to suggest that a crime was committed and that this accused person committed the crime? We're beyond that now. The jury came back with first-degree murder with use of a deadly weapon against an elderly person. So there's a different consideration now. What is the appropriate punishment? So I'm sure that Mr. Draskovich and Mr. Horvath will present information on behalf of their own client, we will be presenting certain information that we want the jury to consider as well.
Forgive me if you answered this before I got here. Will, what was behind the decision not to seek the death penalty in this case?
Well, there are certain cases that are appropriate for consideration of the death penalty and certain cases that aren't. A decision was reached that this was not an appropriate case to seek the death penalty.
I was asking why.
I'm not going to go into the analysis that went into that decision. I will tell you, in my 12 and a half years of being the district attorney, we have decided to file a death penalty in a number of cases, and we have decided not to file in a number of cases. Every case has its unique facts and circumstances, the background of the accused person, the gravity of the offense, the nature and circumstances. But a decision was made in this case not to seek the death penalty, but I'm confident that whatever sentence is rendered, that's a chunk of prison time that Mr. Tellis will have to serve.
Can you explain how the deadly weapon enhancement and the lying in wait factor could affect the sentencing?
I didn't hear you, Caitlin.
Can you explain how the deadly weapon enhancement and the lying in wait factor could affect the sentencing?
Well, the jury's going to consider all of the evidence. I mean, this was a crime, in our opinion, that was clearly premeditated. There was planning involved. It wasn't a decision in a couple of minutes or moments to kill Mr. Gehrman. There was planning involved. Lying in wait, I think the jury will consider that. The jury will, of course, consider that he brought a deadly weapon. So they will consider all of these things in their decision.
Did you know Jeff Gehrman personally, and just what can you say on a personal level about his work?
I knew Jeff for probably close to 40 years. He had a stellar reputation in this community. He was a zealot. He was an excellent investigative reporter. I did work with Jeff over the years. It's a crying shame, literally and figuratively, that he's no longer with us.
Sir, Mr. Tellis brought up a conspiracy theory that involved both private and public figures. Would you be willing to address something?
I think they're ludicrous. There was no conspiracy. The only conspiracy was between him and his evil mind. All of the people that he accused of being part of a conspiracy had no role in any conspiracy, and I think the jury's verdict speaks directly to that. That's it. Thank you. Very good.